There's a quiet shift that happens when you have about $20,000 saved, not $2,000, not $5,000, around $20,000. Nothing about your life looks dramatically different on the outside. You're still going to work, still paying bills, still living your normal routine, but internally, something changes. You stop reacting as quickly. You don't feel the same urgency to say yes to everything. You start asking different questions. And what's interesting is the financial system doesn't really benefit from that version of you because a person with no savings has to keep moving, but a person with $20,000, they can pause. And that pause changes everything. Now, when people hear something like banks fear people with savings, it can sound a little dramatic. Banks aren't sitting in rooms worried about individuals. That's not really how it works. But what is true is that the financial system is designed around movement, money moving, people borrowing, people spending, people staying active inside the system because that's how the system generates profit. And when you don't have savings, you're naturally pulled into that cycle. You rely on credit, you make decisions under pressure. You prioritize immediate needs over long term thinking, not because you're irresponsible, but because you don't have room. So it's not that banks fear you as a person, it's that the version of you who has savings behaves differently. And that behavior doesn't always align with how the system makes money. Let's think about how most financial products work. Credit cards make money when you carry a balance or use them frequently. Loans generate profit through interest over time. Even simple things like overdraft fees or late fees come from moments when people don't have enough cushion. The system benefits when people are slightly off balance, not completely struggling, but just enough that they need to rely on financial tools. Now imagine two people, one has $500 in their account, the other has $20,000 saved. Both of them face the same unexpected expense. Let's say their car needs a $1,200 repair. The first person feels immediate pressure. They might put it on a credit card. Maybe they don't have the full amount available, so it turns into a balance. And over time, that balance grows with interest. The second person, they feel it, but differently. They can pay for it. They can step back. They can decide. There's no urgency forcing them into a specific choice, and that's the real difference. Savings doesn't just change what you can afford, it changes how you make decisions. There's also a psychological layer that most people don't connect to money. When you don't have savings, your brain stays in a heightened state. You're constantly scanning for risk. Every bill matters. Every unexpected cost feels like a disruption. And over time, that creates a pattern. You become more reactive, more focused on short term survival, more willing to trade future stability for present relief. Again, not because you want to, but because your situation is training you to think that way. Now, when you build savings, especially around that $20,000 range, your brain starts to register something different: stability, not perfection, not wealth, just stability. And when your brain feels stable, it stops pushing you into urgent decisions. You start thinking longer term. You start evaluating instead of reacting. You start saying no to things that don't align. And here's where things get interesting because when you behave like that, you naturally reduce how much you rely on the system. You don't need to borrow as often. You don't pay as many fees. You don't make decisions out of urgency. You become more independent, and independence doesn't generate as much profit as dependence. There's another subtle shift that happens too, and it's about your relationship with time. When you don't have savings, time feels compressed. Everything feels immediate. Your job feels necessary, not optional. Your schedule feels fixed. Your choices feel limited. But when you have a financial cushion, even if it's just a few months of expenses, time starts to expand. You realize you have options, not unlimited options, but enough to think, enough to choose, enough to not rush into decisions that don't feel right. You might not quit your job, but you don't feel trapped in it the same way. You might still work hard, but the pressure feels different. And that shift, that quiet sense of optionality, is one of the most powerful changes money can create. Now, let's be clear about something. $20,000 isn't some magical number. For some people, that might represent a few months of expenses. For others, it might represent more or less. But psychologically, it often sits in that range where life starts to have ease.